good afternoon. We have a few videos here. Mainly Cassia and myself, and one photo. Well, that's not compulsory, but that would be great if you can also switch your video, especially if you are intervening. As you know, the Cassia Gorgol is the digital attaché or tech attaché in the European Union, in EAS, European External Action Service. And she's one of the first digital attachés in the posted in Geneva. EAS has attachés in Washington, Beijing, and other places. Now, Cassia joined the Geneva tech scene and the circle of the digital tech attachés a few years ago, and she experienced what would be very interesting for our discussion. It is the question how you navigate as a newly appointed diplomat, how you navigate the Geneva digital scene. What are the signposts? How you exchange information? What are the places where you can get updates? What is the way of sharing information among colleagues? Therefore, there are tips and tricks which Cassia, together with the other colleagues who are at this session from the tech attaché circle, will share in next 20 plus minutes. Without further ado, Cassia, tell us what is the digital diplomats in Geneva. Go ahead. You just may turn a bit your camera because we see your eyes, which is fine, but yeah, okay. That would be a bit better. Yeah, thank you. Yes, perfect. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Jovan. Excellencies, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for inviting me as a facilitator of this breakout session. I will not speak for the whole 25 minutes. I will just make a very short introduction, and then I will try to stimulate the discussion with a couple of questions that I have prepared for you. So to present myself, like Jovan said, I work at the European Union delegation to the UN in Geneva. We have two delegations in Geneva, one to the UN where I work and the other one to WTO. And we also have a delegation in Bern for bilateral relations. And my main assignment is within the UN, but I also have a look on what is happening elsewhere, because like Jovan said, digital is a horizontal question. So there are also many interesting topics happening outside the UN. Before coming to Geneva, I worked at the European Commission in the department which is called DG Connect, which sounds maybe very technical, but it is a department which developed the main EU strategy for the digital policy, which is called the Digital Single Market Strategy, which covers many different topics such as telecoms, e-commerce, research, innovation, artificial intelligence, etc. So I basically have been working in this field in the past, and now I look more broadly and try to make a bridge between what is happening in Geneva and what is happening in Brussels. And when it comes to navigating the digital policy landscape in Geneva, the first thing that I would like to say is that it cannot be done without Geneva Internet Platform, or at least it is very difficult.
Sounds like a PR, Cassia. It is not arranged, I can tell you. But thank you.
No, it is an honest assessment, because myself I benefited from some trainings for diplomats that you are offering, and I also find the monthly digital watch newsletters very helpful, and what you post online, and obviously the events. So we are not starting from scratch. We are actually very privileged to have already a community of interested stakeholders, and I think it was also very well explained in the introductory remarks. But of course, things can always be better, and as digital questions are spreading and are becoming more and more present on the agenda of all UN organizations and also outside the UN in Geneva, including those that work on very technical things, like for instance WHO or ILO, which at the first glance might seem far from the digital world, but no, with the e-health, with the future of work, with many different topics, I think our scope of potential activities and our scope of interesting topics is getting broader and broader. So a mapping of digital files, digital projects in Geneva can indeed be a helpful tool for diplomats to navigate in this environment. And I would assume that in particular for those who have to follow many different organizations and many different topics, from small missions which might not necessarily benefit from the resources that we can devote to it, because like Jovan said, I am only assigned to this portfolio, but many diplomats, they have to deal with several different portfolios. By coincidence, the EU ambassadors in Geneva, so I mean the ambassadors of the EU member states, and of course Walter, the head of the EU delegation, they have also come up, they came to the conclusion that we would need a better overview of what is happening in different organizations to be able to organize ourselves, to be able to follow processes more closely and decide which ones should we prioritize. They have asked us, including myself, to come up with a mapping of what is happening where. So we have a first attempt internally in the EU. It is basically a document with a list of different initiatives and short descriptions. It is not a perfect solution. It is not a comprehensive solution, and I'm happy to share the experience of coming up with this mapping. But I would not want to preempt the discussion yet, so perhaps I will say it towards the end of our session. And I would like now to move to ask you, the participants of this session, a couple of questions to stimulate our conversation. And perhaps the first one that I would like to suggest would be a quiz question. Jovan, could you help me a little bit if this can...
the poll, yes. Okay.
The poll, yeah?
Yes, it's available. It's on the screen.
So where is it?
I guess you can see it. Well, I can see it.
Voilà, I can see it, yeah. So there are two replies. So the question here, I will read it, is which of the UN organizations involved in the digital policy in Geneva is the most relevant for your work? So for the moment, ITU is the big winner, but we also have some others. So let's give it a few more minutes.
It's interesting, the Cassia, that that's probably shows also what community is in the room, because we have, it seems the WTO UNCTAD community is still ITC, trade community, and we have ITU community as two main communities. With regard to what you mentioned about internal mapping, and while we're waiting, just one question that we may pose for all of us, is this challenge of cross-cutting digitalization making a huge push for the reorganization of the, for example, your mission? Olivier from the Swiss mission mentioned it in his introductory remark, that they have to reorganize the mission internally. And what about also reorganization back in the capital? These are also interesting issues, because you face this cross-cutting aspect in most radical way in Geneva. But what about cascading effect to the mission and to, let's say, EAS service? That is an interesting reflection. Now you can comment on the results of the survey.
Yes, so we can see that we have 20 out of 30 participants who voted. So I think this gives us 66% of turnout, which is not bad, I think. So the big winner is ITU. 60% of participants said that this is the agency that is most relevant for their work. Then we have WTO, and it doesn't surprise me, because sometimes responsibilities are connected. So colleagues who are responsible for ITU, they will very often be also responsible for WTO. Then we have UNCTAD on the third position. We have WIPO, ITC, so International Trade Center, and others, equally receiving one vote each. I realized that I had forgotten in this list to add UNIDIR, which is also a very interesting stakeholder that works on cybersecurity, and perhaps many of you are for many of you, from the perspective of disarmament, this could also be a very relevant stakeholder. But okay, so Jovan, now you know a little bit better where the interest is. Let's...
Kasia, one point which you may reflect on, and the others on this cascading effect on changes. But what is here very interesting is that we have one entry point, which is mainly, let's say, ITU, telecommunication, trade. But we, for example, miss health entry point, which is becoming increasingly important with the contact tracing apps and the other things. Or we miss humanitarian, also ICRC, or standardization with international. Okay, ITU covers part of the standardization. That's an interesting aspect for maybe for your reflection about this connecting the dots, and for the others on that. Is it that the man with hammer in his hands is nailing everything, or are we realistic in grasping, and who is making sure? I know you're doing it, complete picture in the AS in Geneva. Question for reflection, and later on, just we will bombard you with many questions, at least myself. The question of what is happening in Brussels? Can we learn something from Brussels about similar challenge? I would say in different contexts, but similar challenge.
So would you like me to reply to the first question, or is it a question that is posed to all the participants of this chat?
You are now in front of firing squad, and then the others will join. Okay, please go ahead.
But I really encourage interactive discussions, so please don't be shy, and everyone who would like to participate and reply questions, I would suggest that you raise your hand or you simply take the mic, because we are not so many people. So your question is it realistic to cover everything comprehensively? No, I think it isn't, and I think we have to be very humble in our in the way we approach topics, and also I think for everyone, depending on the priorities probably of the capitals to whom you are reporting, it's very important to have a list of priorities, and it's very important, I think, to have a reflection on which topics are more for a interest of diplomats and which are more for interest of technical experts. And typically standardization is a topic that you would think is mainly for technical experts, but there can also be some surprises. There can also be some dimensions that are slightly more political. So not exclude. Let's not exclude that the topic that doesn't look appealing at the first stage is not interesting. So for this, it is indeed useful to have a general overview of what is happening where. But I don't think that. I think it is beyond one person's capacity to come up with a comprehensive picture of exactly what is happening where. So having broad avenues is possible, and I think it's also a dynamic exercise in the sense that it's not done once every 5 years, let's say, or once forever, because things are changing and some things are getting more dynamics. Like for instance, you mentioned WHO. I think we can expect a lot of work on related to COVID, related to applications, on new technologies as well. But perhaps some topics have been on the agenda a couple of years ago, and the dynamics have a little bit slowed down. So at a certain point, it's also useful to have this sensitivity, what's coming and what's a little bit perhaps becoming less relevant.
Kasia, one question just, and then you can also reflect how your mission is adapting, which is, I think, probably the most interesting. One question is, you are seeing this problem as difficult per se. For example, if you have now unlimited budget in EAS and you can hire as many people as you want for Geneva, would you be able to solve this problem of let's say, connecting the dots or making sure that standardization negotiation of 5G also relate to the e-commerce or human rights or health? Is it a matter of the sheer complexity of the task or number of helping hands, or both?
I think it's a little bit both, and I think it's what is also important is is to be able to make a connection between processes here and, in my case, processes in Brussels. I would not expect that we would come up with a unit, an army of people who are sitting in Geneva, but also with the new technologies, with being able to have more and more meetings online, like the meetings that we are having today, we can do useful things simply or already by making the first step, which is informing people what is happening. And then it's for their assessment of how relevant it is for the capitals. So on the budget, I think my bosses would certainly welcome more resources and more budget for the delegation in Geneva. And President of the European Commission, Ms. von der Leyen, she said that multilateral relations are very important for the EU. So I hope we will continue to invest resources in this.
Good. Kasia, thank you. We have here the comment from the Wojciech, which is very interesting, of engaging the stakeholders, engaging the other communities. We already almost thought of managing complexity that you as digital diplomats have to when you deal with the international organizations, but Wojciech decided to increase complexity. Then we have the multi-stakeholders, and I think his comment is really, really highly relevant. What about tech companies? What about civil society and the other actors? Is there in the audience anyone who can give us useful tips how to manage this complexity? And Kasia will comment later on of the way how it is managing their mission. In particular, has EAS mission in Geneva adjusted and to what extent to these changes? We heard about the mapping exercise. Waiting for the input from this really knowledgeable audience. I know it's lunchtime, but we wouldn't mind if you are in the middle of your lunch and you don't need to switch on camera. Okay.
Jovan, I do have an additional question for Kasia and the other colleague, the other diplomats in the room. Since the ITU is the organization which is the most, let's say, relevant based on the poll, how do you deal with an organization where so many things are going on? Do you rely on a mapping initiative there? Is there some sort of a guidebook that helps you, basically? Thank you.
Okay, Kasia, many questions for you. First, how your mission is adjusting. Second, any guidebook for ITU? Maybe something on mapping you did, and a question about Brussels while we are waiting for the others to join. Go ahead.
So our mission has adjusted 2.5 years ago when I arrived in February 2018, and basically so I think what was important for them is to have somebody with a technical background, not meaning a technical expert or anything or on everything, because that doesn't exist, but somebody who has been working on the file in Brussels and who is maybe not a career diplomat, in a sense, somebody who I haven't been posted in any other missions, and I don't know if I will ever be in the future, but I have been more like a technocrat, let's say, who is now experimenting with the digital diplomacy. And the second thing is that in my case, so my portfolio is like for most participants here, ITU, but we keep it really flexible. And whenever there is a need for input from other policy areas, I am being consulted, or I am informally helping my colleagues sometimes from the back seat, let's say, when things are happening in the Human Rights Council or in WIPO or in the disarmament section. Voila. So we keep it flexible, and we have somebody with a technical background, let's say. That's how we have adjusted. Now, on the question how to deal with a complex organization like the ITU, indeed, it is a very complex organization with a very interesting history, because it's one of the most, if not the most, the oldest organization in Geneva. I think SG Zhao, he always says that that ITU is older than ILO. I'm not sure, but they have their procedures and they have their legacy structures, and also the way the management functions. It is really an organization with a lot of history. So it's not always easy to navigate within the ITU. My own very basic tip is to have a couple of good contact points who can explain things when needed. And I can certainly recommend it. People who know legal aspects of functioning of the ITU, practical aspects, procedural, especially procedural aspects. That's very important. On your third question, Jovan, could you remind me?
The third question is about Brussels. What we can learn from Brussels in navigating Geneva? Do we need to use the similar maps, or Brussels is completely different? GPS for Brussels.
Very difficult question, because Brussels is slightly, I think it's slightly different because the competencies of the European Commission are different than of any other secretariat of an international organization, right? The European Commission has the right of legislative initiative, and this translates into how the whole system is functioning and how we cooperate with the member states as well. Also, I mean, the complexity of Brussels is not less than what we have in Geneva. It's probably even more, because you have, in addition to having, the main theater, the EU institutions, there is much more, I think, presence of the private sector than in Geneva. And this is also related to the question of competence, because in Brussels, they actually write legislation. So the whole ecosystem of public affairs has developed. There are also, of course, missions of the EU member states who work directly in the EU Council on shaping the legislation, the European Parliament, as you know, and the mission of third countries. I'm a little bit less knowledgeable because I didn't have so many contacts with third countries missions when I was in Brussels. But I would have to think a little bit more on your question to give you an informed reply about complexity.
I think you already hinted one of the key difference, which is the huge lobbying power of the private sector, which creates also different atmosphere. What I learned in the Brussels and my interaction with Digital Brussels is that people are much more cautious because of the lobbying exercises, parallel, in what capacity you are approaching, and the other elements. There is one phenomenon which we should keep in mind, that private sector is often covering Geneva from Brussels. People, either London or Brussels, who are in Brussels, they fly to Geneva. We hope to bring them more frequently to Geneva and to have them more based in Geneva, but this is an interesting interplay, Brussels, Geneva. I can see in audience, we have quite a few colleagues, even from New York. We have Giovanni Buttigieg, Deputy Ambassador of Malta. Thank you, Giovanni, for waking up so early. We have Antoine from Francophonie, and Antoine Barbie, who is basically having a huge task to make sure that small Francophonie, especially African countries, can follow it effectively. I'm sure that they are taking quite a useful notes. Let us see now the comments, a few comments that we got. After Wojciech, we got Amir Mokaberia from Iran, and he's posing the question, which is a question of jurisdiction, and the question if ICANN will one day move to Geneva, like ITU and WTO, because of the immunities and jurisdiction. Amir, it is a question which is more political question related to ICANN and their constituencies. There are open issues, and on the question of jurisdiction of ICANN from, in this case, California juridical system. And this is intensively discussed in ICANN community, especially in the Government Advisory Council. I'm not aware of any plan or attempt to bring ICANN to Geneva. In the past, it was the case, and there were ideas that ICANN may replicate the organization of the Red Cross, which would be NGO under Swiss law with immunity and with different constituencies, basically. Then we have Luca. Luca, welcome, Luca. Luca from Zurich, AI specialist. Mapping is highly important, but how do you make sure that mapping efforts are also aligned, coordinated with other initiatives in this field? Luca, you're involved in AI field, and this is one question. What we notice is there is blockchain mapping, there is a cyber security mapping, there is what people call internet governance, digital mapping. And at one point we counted only in Geneva 10 mapping exercises. Therefore, cartographers are very busy in Geneva with different mapping exercises. But what is the key point is to ask common sense question. What do you refer to? And I know, for example, that Alexander create another map for Switzerland, bringing the Swiss priorities in digital policy. Alexander, you switch on camera, therefore I have to mention you. And then we have Hisashi Saito on the question on the human rights aspect. Hisati, yes, you can intervene, you can switch on mic. Try to focus on the question on the navigating the issues, not issues per se, how we especially connect different digital aspects. The floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. My name is Hisashi Saito. I'm a representative of educational NGO for sustainability called Juventum, and often attending Human Rights Council. And concerning human rights defenders who traveling from far away, and they attend, and then often face intimidation and reprisals, and particularly when they go home, and they could be taken away. And we don't even have a very basic system for the human rights organization or human rights council to know their safety or whereabouts, while the enemies who know where they are. So it's like kidnappers know where the kid is, but the parents don't know where they are. And then I think all this remote participation will promote the human rights discussion worldwide. So we should give more chance for participation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hisashi. You have this translucent camera. I don't know if it is on purpose, but we can hear you quite well. And this is important issue of engagement in specific issue areas like human rights. We can reflect later on our experience from Right On series of events. Cassia, we don't want to deprive our participants from enjoying the coffee break. They will have a few interesting coffee tables. And we will just make a quick wrap up. I think, Alexander, are you raising your hand? No?
Yes, please. Yes, excuse me, Jovan. I'm on my cell phone, and hence I couldn't find the raise hand button. So I did it physically, but you could see me at least virtually. Thank you very much, really, for all the introduction. Also to Kassa, I think it's very interesting points, especially about the complexity of the topics. And I think what Stephanie also raised already within one organization like the ITU, it is sometimes not very easy to really navigate it. And what we see also, I think that had been mentioned before, is that we more and more have transversal topics. So we're not only organized, so missions are not only organized in according to different organizations, but more according to the transversal theme. Now, I think within the organizations, there have been certain coordination mechanisms which have made it much easier for member states to follow it. For example, regional coordinations, etc. Now, I wonder also if and in what way we could think of these kind of coordination mechanisms, regional coordinations, helping each other out, diplomats helping diplomats out on covering the issues, etc. How we can transfer this then to the more transversal level of for example, the topic of digitalization as a whole. And I think, and Kasia had mentioned it as well, obviously the Geneva Internet Platform is doing a great job in bringing the topics together, make them understood. But I wonder if there is also for us diplomats, which are growing, covering digital issues, if we can also play or should play a certain role in this kind of regional coordinators, helping other missions which might not have these resources, yeah, bring them up to speed of the discussions, which also already for us is sometimes more difficult. But maybe we can really benefit from each other and try to organize us also in some more informal groups to do actually that. That may be one point I wanted to mention. Another point is the mapping exercise as such. I think we should probably think of the common themes that are being discussed in different spheres and different international organizations. I do believe that when it comes to digital issues, whether they're being treated within the World Health Organizations, covering, for example, digital apps to fight the COVID-19 pandemics, or be then more in the humanitarian sphere, when digital instruments are being used there to help humanitarian efforts, there will be similar topics and questions. And how can we bring them together? So I'm speaking, for example, of data privacy. How can we cover these issues and discuss these issues that then have different or same effects, but in different organizations? That just maybe some food for thought. I hope I didn't make the discussion much more complex than it already was. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alex, for really insightful aspect. I just got a complaint from the coffee bar of smokers that there are only 2 smokers in the coffee room for smokers. But I told them, listen, I cannot force people to go for a coffee break. Therefore, we have Antoine. Maybe we'll just experience for 5 minutes, but we have Antoine and then Kasia in her wrapping up remarks. Antoine, how you navigate this complexity? Please go ahead.
Thanks, Jovan, for this very interesting session and all the relevant questions that you raised. But I have a question exactly related to that complexity, because we've been talking about how Geneva is becoming very complex on digital related issues, how there are many more institutions dealing with these aspects. And at the same time, we see this tendency of some permanent mission to have a counselor specifically dedicated to digital affairs. But isn't it a bit contradictory? If you increase the number of institutions, if you increase the complexity, how can one person deal with all these different issues on her own? So I'm a bit puzzled by this ambivalent choice, to give all the portfolio to one single person while at the same time increasing the complexity.
Thank you, Antoine. It's a really pointed question. I'm sure Kasia will reflect, but let me just give a slight help to Kasia, and then we will be moving to coffee break. Is that probably we live in transition time where that person like Kasia in the EAS mission is giving helping hand to people in traditional policy areas, human rights, humanitarian health, to start considering digitalization. Okay. But down the line, everything will be in a way digital. Therefore, you won't have a digital commerce, you will have just commerce or health. Yeah. Kasia, concluding remarks based on these few questions and the suggestions.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Jovan. So yes, I mean, in one sentence, I would say that teamwork is really very important in this field because of the complexity that we discussed and because of the fact that sometimes there is a need of very specific expertise of the subject matter, and the digital horizontal issues come on top of it. That's the question of data protection, for example, is a good example because it concerns all specific, let's say, vertical policy areas. So voila, teamwork, flexibility, and I think the mapping, as mentioned before, is not a static exercise. It will never be a complete process. It's a process of rotating and making new circles, which may be smaller, bigger, a little bit placed in different positions. And for these networks like Geneva Internet Platform are very helpful, and you have already done a very good job on this in the past. So I'm looking forward to continuing cooperation.
Thank you. Thank you, Kasia. Some sort of conclusion is that we will remain confused. That's inevitable because of the nature of issue, but we may get confused on the higher level, which is some sort of good news for all of us. But I think we heard a lot of very useful insights. Thank you for especially to you, Kasia, who who framed the discussion, and for other inputs in chat and from inputs from our colleagues who made their comments and points. We will summarize all sessions, including the points that were raised today and which require a lot of follow-up discussion. Now you have literally 3 minutes to grab your espresso before we move back to the next session. I promise that this event will be very interactive and dynamic, but it is becoming too dynamic. With the 3 minutes coffee break, it's really something. Not even espresso, you can get ristretto, but it's Italian way. You just take it and you move on. Therefore, you will be going back to meetings, diplomacy, you click to coffee break, be very disciplined, and return at 2 o'clock to the main plenary session. Thank you and see you soon. Bye.